Hi guys, here today to talk about practical off-season training and considerations for coaches. Really excited to bring this to you guys. I know this is going to be a big topic, especially as we start returning to sport. One of the big things that we do see is when people take time off from training and then they return back to their sport without actually having any type of training or doing any other type of physical activity, the risk of injury goes up. So it's a two-part lecture today. I'm going to bring you guys about programming for that, and then we'll follow with Chris LeFever about minimizing the injuries coming forward. All right, so just a quick overview. My slides are going to be over maximizing performance, and then also focus on off-season programming, which is, again, you can kind of consider this whole quarantine an off-season since we've been off for 2 months, and now that everything's starting to kick back out, we'll start revving them up again just so we can keep them safe and healthy. All right, here we go. Before we start, just want to send a big thank you out to Dr. Gregory. Huge shout out to her. We're really excited to be a part of this, especially as a worker of athlete training and health. UT Ortho, and of course the Ironman Sports Medicine Institute with Memorial Hermann. It's great to be a partner with them. We work very closely together as an entity of athlete training and health, and so we're just super excited to be a part of this. So thank you guys for this opportunity. All right, just a brief overview real quick, what we're gonna work on today and go over. So number one, we're gonna determine the demands of the sport for the athletes and then also what the sport is. And then we'll go into just applying the applications and different variations of strength conditioning. The one thing I always say is kind of start simple and then go for it, get big. All right, so as we know as coaches and physical therapists, athletic trainers, we work with a variety of sports that have millions of different demands. And when you're kind of programming for that, you also want to really emphasize those characteristics. So just for example, you're not going to train a football player the same as you would a swimmer, and vice versa. So here I just have a couple of examples of different traits in sporting. So power, strength, speed and agility, anaerobic and aerobic fitness. So, really before you guys program, you really got to look at what those specific goals are, what is involved in that sport, and then you kind of can attack it there. And then you have a variety of sports that require a lot of different types of demands. So, for example, soccer, you got to be explosive. You have to have both anaerobic conditioning. You have to be strong to handle the demands of the sport. Because I think a lot of times, with soccer, you don't think you have to be strong, but it's very important to be able to encompass all of that. All right. So again, just like we were talking about with the sports demand, you want to prioritize the training. So really understand why and what you are training for. So you got to really understand the characteristics of the sport. So for example, and I gave this example before, football versus cross country. A football player really develops power and strength and explosive power and speed, which we would consider like acceleration. A cross country runner, they run for a longer distance of time. So strength and power aren't necessarily as important as a football player. And then also you can look at soccer versus American football. Football is a high collision sport. Soccer, not so much. Both you need to be strong in to handle the demands, but football is going to emphasize a little bit more power and a little bit more durability since they're taking those hits. So kind of understanding the sports and what their demands are. And just another example, cross country is going to work on a lot of aerobic fitness since they're going to be going for a longer time. Football is going to be a little more anaerobic. Football plays only can be 5 to 10 seconds. A cross country run is 3 miles plus. And same thing for track runners that run in the mile, 2 miles, steeplechase, stuff like that. And then also again, kind of comparing soccer to American football. Soccer games are continual. There's no timeouts. There could be some standing around, but most of the times people are moving. You will have that short burst of sprints, but for the majority of the time, people are staying active and moving. So you do have to work on aerobic and anaerobic fitness. And again, American football, it's very, it's a very anaerobic game where we're running as hard and going as hard as we can for about 5 to 10 seconds, and then backing off and kind of taking a little bit of a break to kind of rehuddle and then go back at it again. So just understanding that is going to set you guys up for success in programming for it. So again, I have another example. I'm a big Ohio State fan. I'm from Ohio. So, we got the Buckeyes on the right, and then here we have a sevens rugby women's team. So the big difference between this is rugby sevens, again, is a very high-paced game. It lasts for about 7 to 10 minutes, but it's continual running, continual sprinting, very little break. So the anaerobic capacity and aerobic capacity has to be high. Also, both that is very important to both is strength and power. Again, for football, just taking football as an example, because these sports are very similar, there's a lot of time in between each play. So understanding those is going to be huge to set you guys up for success. I wouldn't run my football players for 3 miles because that's just going to detrain them, because that's not what they're built for. So indeterminates, when we're coming back to play and getting our athletes ready to go and understanding where they're at. One thing, especially at athlete training health and dealing with Memorial Hermann and the Ironman Sports Medicine Institute, we do a lot of testing. And testing is so important because it gives you guys a base on how the athlete is moving. You can compare, if you guys did testing before, you can kind of compare where they were pre and post. And this gives you such a good guideline to start programming. So just for example, I know you guys can see this. This is one of the sheets that we use at Athlete Training and Health. So we have a bunch of different stuff that we do here, and I'll try to get through it as fast as I can. But obviously we got to understand their, what age they are, because, in athlete training and health, and all of us, we could deal with younger athletes, not just these big collegiate football players or collegiate athletes. So understanding their age. The one cool thing that we do at Athlete Training and Health is we do get their seated height, which helps determine kind of where they are in their maturation cycle. And we can kind of tailor their workouts based on that. So obviously during their maturation cycle, the tendons and the bones are growing a little bit differently. So that can set up for some type of injury. So understanding that is a key to be able to back off on plyometrics or, other types of training that could hurt maybe their knees or, stuff like that. And then here we're working on we're looking at power from using the jumps. So you guys see the jump ability down here. So we got the squat jump, counter movement jump, concentric jumps, broad jumps. And then we're also working on speed and just kind of seeing their change of direction as well. So we have a 10, 20, a 30, and a 40. And then again, just to kind of look at asymmetries, we got the 5-0-5. So just a quick thing on that. That's almost like the 5-10-5 you would see at a combine. But what you would do is you would just sprint 15 yards, turn back, and come 5 yards. And that kind of can tell based off the different times if one leg is a little bit slower than the other. And that kind of helps us program as well. We'd also do, you'll see a lot of people who do, 1-rep max test and everything like that. And that's fine if that works in your program. For us, we do a mid-thigh pull, which is we use just a strength index where, you're pulling against this index, going as hard as you can. And you're just holding for 5 seconds, and it tells you how much force you're developing. And that kind of eliminates the onset if you guys do have some heavy weight on your back that, it could set up for a little bit of injuries. It's a little safer for our athletes and also our younger athletes. And then we have some other stuff here as well, just looking on power. But again, having this testing is going to be huge because it gives you guys a base on where they're at in their training, where they're at in their maturation, to help you guys kind of tailor the program. I know most of us are working with team sports, so even for collectively having some type of testing measures is going to be really big on going forward in the programming. All right, so we're kind of going to get into it real quick, and I have a couple of example slides that I'll show you guys on how to create an annual program. And take this as a grain of salt. There's a million ways to skin a cat in strength and conditioning. This is just one way that I have found success, and here at Athlete Training Health that we have it as well. So an annual training program, you guys can look at this as the start of the year or the start of your season. Let's just take football again, for example. Football season just doesn't start in the fall. It starts right after that last championship game. So you really kind of want to look at it, the championship game and then plan backwards. There's a million things that you can put on the calendar. Again, I'll show you guys some stuff that we have. But just to kind of help program, what we do include, especially in our athletes, is we include different types of the training. So if it's our football, if we're in the off season, we're going to work a little bit more on kind of general preparation. They've been banged up all year, so we're kind of low off on conditioning and all that stuff. We're kind of just be in the weight room trying to work on strength and keeping our strength up. Working on the little things, making sure form is good, and they're healthy and they're feeling good to get going for the spring ball and stuff like that. But yeah, you can include a lot of different things. I know one thing that helps out is putting games down. So obviously, if you're off season, there's no games unless you're in spring ball. You got your spring game and stuff like that. But there's not really a lot of time that you really have to take off from training, and training should be the emphasis. So one thing, when you guys get in season, it's important especially to tailor the training to see, maybe I have a game on Friday, so I have to back it off on a Thursday. And that kind of helps with the program. And again, I'll show you guys the slide that we have. And then the calendar, I have why create the calendar. It just helps you stay the course. Things change over time. Things happen. People get injured. Games might get canceled. So it just kind of gives you a little bit of a tailor to see how you can kind of lay out that program. And then if you're unfamiliar with kind of creating a program, that's why we're here to help you guys for sure and help you guys dive into that, because it can be a little confusing at times. So here's just a quick example of, actually, this is a track athlete that I trained. And I'll just kind of go over with you. I know there's kind of a lot of stuff on this annual training plan, but this helps me break it down in months. So if you guys look at, So if you guys look at the red up front where it says months right here, and you can see there's the months along the side. The red are going to be the off season. The green are going to be the in season, and then the yellow is going to be kind of like the final prep, where like the championship track meet is. So how we break this down, and you guys can see where it says periodization right here. Again, this is the preparation phase. So this is when we're going to really be focused on getting strong, and really working on our skills and everything like that. This is where conditioning comes in. We can't really work on a lot of conditioning here because it could be taxing on them when they're in their season or in their competition phase. So a lot of general conditioning coming here, really working on, I like to say the ugly workouts when you're working pretty hard and you're grinding pretty hard. And then from there, we kind of move into special prep. So, we kind of back off on the conditioning. We're really focused on skill development. So for a track athlete, we're working on block work. We're working on speed work. We're working on moving weight fast. We've been lifting heavy all for this whole off season. So now we're working on a lot of velocity and, really moving the weights fast. And then from here in the competition, we're going to do, more of a maintenance phase. So we really don't want to lose what we have gained during this time. So here is going to be more of a maintenance phase. We're not really looking for athletes to be sore. We want to get them in the weight room, get them on that conditioning track where they're feeling good. And it's a tough, intense workout, but also they're feeling ready to go and prime for their competition. And then here's just some macro cycles. So you can see everything's divided by a month. So again, just kind of we'll go back to November, heavy on the conditioning here, because there's no competitions. Once we get done with kind of that first month and they're kind of feeling good and they're getting back and ready to go, then we work on kind of just like general prep or like a base phase of strength training. So this is just kind of getting them ready to work on some heavy lifting. Then we start getting a little bit more specific. Again, we're working on, for a track athlete, we're working on being explosive, especially for a sprinter. We're working on being explosive and powerful out of the blocks. In the weight room, we're dropping the weight, and then we're moving the weight fast as we can. From here, then, it's kind of be like a competition phase. As you can see, we're going to unload this phase. So again, we're not going to be lifting super heavy. We won't have as many reps or sets, but we go in the weight room with intent, and then we get out so they're able to recover. Once they get done with here and we're getting ready for finals, we're going to ramp it back up and get ready to peak. So the track athlete is ready to take that 100-meter dash and win it all. So again, I know there's a lot on here, but hopefully you guys can see how it kind of processes through. And you can do this for any type of sport. I know a lot of times sports are all year round, especially when you get into the club season. So being able to label those dates where you guys have games, when you guys have off, can help you guys tailor those workouts. So let's say you guys have a game, 1 week, but then 3 weeks later you guys don't have a game. It's very important in that 3 weeks that you can get some good work in since they're going to be off. And you don't want them to kind of lose what they have gained, or again, if you guys take too long of a break, it can set them up for a little bit more injury, and then they kind of lose what they had. And you guys can see here, I'll just bring you guys down to the end, the training intensity right here. You can see in November, especially once they get off in October, this is kind of like the off season, you're ramping back up. So you can see how the line goes up. It comes back down because usually in between about a 4 to 5 week block, we have a deload just to kind of give them a little bit of recovery. Then we go back up and ramp it back up and shock them. So like usually we go about 4 to 6 weeks, hit a deload meaning, we don't really work on a lot of heavy stuff. We might do a lot of auxiliary lifts, maybe work on a little bit of skill. That way the body can kind of recover. Then we ramp it back up with new exercises, a little bit more complex. And you guys can see this line is trending upward. Then again, we take another little break, ramps back up, kind of comes back down. And then you guys can see once they start getting to the competition phase, the training starts to go down a little bit and it maintains a little ebbs and flows. And again, with this track athlete, he had some really big competitions coming up, and track athletes usually don't run every weekend, especially if they're a professional. So we could tailor his workouts to kind of ramp up for 2 weeks and then kind of bring him back down. And then here he had a lot of competitions here, so we kind of brought the training down since he was actually running about 2 times. He ran 3 times that month. So then from here, as you guys can tell, we're starting to get into a little bit of closer to the finals, and we want to peak him. So we're bringing him back up. We're ramping the intensity up. And then again, it kind of dips a little bit, take a little bit break, and then we're peaking him right before the finals. And then after that, we're going to bring him back down so he can rest and recover, because February through August, that's a long time to be working hard and also competing. So, rest and recovery is very important. So just to kind of go over, the general phases of off-season training. I know I've spoken this earlier, but, the first one that we talk about is just general physical preparation. This is really big on just working on work capacity. So just for example, everybody's been off on the quarantine. It's really been hard to get in your gyms. A lot of people haven't had a lot of load on their body. So throwing them back into, going out and sprinting or putting whatever their max was on their back in a squat, right when they get back, it's going to be tough for them, especially if they haven't been able to handle done a lot of loading, or have worked out at all. So being able to work on their general preparation to handle the load is going to be really big, and it's going to set them up for success. So in here, we really focus on form. Form is big. We want to make sure we're staying safe when we're in the weight room. We can work out, a lot on mechanics. And here is, again, when we kind of get a general conditioning in, so they're able to handle the loads further on down the line. But I will tell, this is a very important phase to set your team or your athletes up for success later, and then also keep them injury-free in the weight room. Next one is we go to the basic strength phase. So the basic strength phase is, again, we're kind of working on developing force development. We're bringing them into the weight room, starting to work a little bit more on load. And then really, again, honing on the basics. So now that they have their general preparation and they're out of their, they're getting their conditioning back and they're feeling good and ready to start handling the load. Now we start making them, generate some force. Again, this isn't going to be as much weight as it would be if you were in the strength phase or the max strength phase. But again, this is working on general preparation and basic strength to handle those loads throughout the next cycle. And this is another important part that you don't want to skip, because now that the load is starting to go up, we work through that so they can handle the strength phase. The next one, again, is going to be after you do your physical preparation. So they got their general conditioning in, they're feeling good, they're getting back. You got their basic strength phase where they are starting to develop some force. Now we want to take the force. So they're actually developing, we want to put some weight on their back. So they're actually really putting some force to the ground and able to handle those loads. So from here, as you guys can see, we're just going to increase the ability to generate force. We got to be smart with this. That's why it's very important to work on the basics. I think a lot of times and even for myself, it's very easy to kind of see, man, I want to get all fancy and, stuff like that. But focusing on the basics, getting strong in that is going to be very important. So with the strength phase, we're working on percentages. I would say, 85 to 90% of your 1 rep max. So you're lifting pretty heavy. So it's going to be a lot of demand on the body, but it's going to, having them prepared for that is going to lead them to success. The last thing what we do, is, getting them ready for their competitions, or again, we can just use football as an example. Football, we'll say, in September, let's say that's when they start playing. So we've developed a lot of force. We developed a lot of strength. Now we want to kind of drop a little bit of the weight and we want to move fast. We want to take that force, the ability to apply force that we just had, and we want to turn that into high velocity. We want to move this weight fast. That's going to get the nervous system firing. That's going to get them ready to go and, be able to react and move a little bit faster. From here, we're working on a little bit more complex movements, whether it be plyometrics, Olympic lifting, and, stuff like that. So they're ready to be able to get up and go. And again, this all is not, they don't start in the power phase. This leads them up to it. So they're nice. They're safe when they reach this point. They're ready to handle those type of loads and also move that weight fast. So again, for this one, you can kind of look at it as, in the strength phase, we were lifting 85 to 100% of our max. So again, we're moving weight relatively slow. Here, we're going to drop the weight a little bit. We'll say about, 70 to 85% of their 1 rep max. And we're focused on moving that weight fast. And just to go back to the strength phase, in those two phases, you're not going to be doing a lot of high rep stuff. These are going to be a lot of like 5s and triples and singles to really focus on force and power generation. And I have a little example of that going forward too. So you guys can tell just from the NSCA, the National Strength and Conditioning Association, this kind of gives you guys a guideline on how to program when you're in those type of phases. So this phase right here is going to be the general preparation, basic strength phase, where you're kind of getting back into the weight room and getting back to the basics. So for the sets, for the reps, it's going to be about 6 to 12. Sets 3 to 6. Again, see, you guys are working in a way lower capacity here. 67%, 60% is fine. There's a bunch of different ranges, but again, this is just a guideline. And so you're not lifting as much weight. So you were working on the work capacity. So rest is going to be a lot shorter. And again, here's just kind of some guidelines. If you guys have beginner athletes, you can see there's a novice example for how many sets and reps they can do. And then working into the advanced athlete coming here, people who have a higher training age. But again, this phase is going to be very important to develop that basic strength. And again, here's the second one. This is going to be more the strength phase. Again, this one's working 85 to 100% of their 1 rep max. If you guys remember, we're testing them, so we're able to understand where they're at in their training. And yeah, you can tell too, you're lifting heavy. So it's hard to do that back to back. Your nervous system's getting taxed, your muscles are getting a little bit more fatigued, and you're really focusing on the intent of moving that heavy weight fast. So the rest time is going to be a little bit more important. And rest time is, I know it's hard for us to do that sometimes, especially us in the high school settings when we don't have we might have a whole bunch of kids and we don't have a lot of space to do that in. We have to kind of keep them on track. Again, these are guidelines. I know it's kind of hard to do it sometimes, but for the best effect for developing strength, it's going to be this type of recovery. That way, they're ready to go and be able to give their all when they're back. Then the last one is just again a guideline for the power phase. So you guys can see we dropped the weight a little bit. You're working from 80 to 9%. Again, you can see that's working off of a single, just 1 rep. And then this is going to be multiple reps. So maybe let's say you're doing sets of like a triple of a set of 3. You're going to work from about 75 to 95%. Now the emphasis here is going to be intent. And I think that's such a powerful word when you're talking to your athletes. I mean, we deal with some athletes, who kind of go through the motions, and when it's time to shine, we got to go and we got to give it our all. A lot of when you're on the field, you're not just jogging around. Your intent is to win the game. So the mindset especially when you're in when you're in all of these phases, but especially the power phase, when you're working on plyometrics, and if you guys are doing Olympic lifting or med ball throws, is that you are trying to generate as much velocity and force as possible to get the biggest bang for your buck. A big thing we talk about in the power phase is like a mind-muscle connection. And I think that's very important to develop these athletes, and just keep talking to them about that. And cueing is going to be big. If you tell somebody you got to move the earth, like I tell my athletes when we're doing plyometrics or Olympic lifting, that I want them to throw the weight to the ceiling. Like they just need to throw it up as hard as they can. Or if they're working on, acceleration or like short sprints or jumping and bounding, I'm telling them that they need to generate so much force, so much velocity that they're moving the earth away and they're causing some type of shift in the earth. So cueing on these are going to be very important because you're going to get a lot out of your athletes. So I know that was a lot in a few minutes, but it's taking the right steps to develop these athletes, especially as we return back to our sports, is going to be very important. So again, try to get some type of base evaluation where you can kind of see where they're at, because it's hard to judge where the athletes, what they have been doing these last 2 months. So you have an idea on how you can kind of tailor your program, how intense you can make it. If you come in with a bunch of athletes who have been working hard and you've really kind of been on them on staying in shape, you can kind of ramp that first phase up a little bit just because you know that they've been in shape. And then you go throughout the phases just to get them ready back for competition. Because like I said before, a lot of times what we see, and we can use the NFL as an example, is most injuries don't happen during the season. I mean, it does happen, but it's before, because some of the guys haven't been ready to handle the load of the training and kind of how long their practices are and everything like that. So taking the right steps and getting your athlete prepared to handle the demands of their sport is gonna save you guys a ton. If you guys have any questions, I'll have my information on the slide. Please reach out to me. As Athlete Training Health, we're here to help you guys. And again, I just want to thank our partners in UT and the Ironman Sports Medicine Institute with Mamal Herman and Dr. Gregory. Just appreciate the opportunity to speak, and look forward to hearing from you guys soon.
Hey guys, my name is Chris LeFever. I'm a sports physical therapist that works at the Ironman Sports Medicine Institute here at Katy Sports Park. I work closely with Slocum. Our physical therapy department is next door, and today I'll be finishing up the second half of this presentation on minimizing injury. So Chris did an awesome job kind of highlighting the different parts of maximizing performance. And the second half of this will be going into kind of some of the nuances of minimizing injury. So exactly what he just talked about. So what exactly is the intent of this off-season programming? So really what we're trying to do is maximize readiness of the athlete. We want that athlete to be able to draw from their full capacity, which is often improved or maximized during the off-season and the decisions we make during that point. So again, Slocum highlighted these. There are different physical demands that are required from each individual sport, whether it's hypertrophy, strength, power, speed training, aerobic or anaerobic conditioning. The sports medicine and sports rehabilitative and sports performance teams will help to kind of make these decisions on what things are going to be highlighted most in the off-season programming. But again, another one of the big intents is minimizing injury risk. So if we take a big step back and look at this from a 10,000-foot view, there are a variety of different articles out there that dive into the different things that we should be focusing on with minimizing injury. There is so much different information out there, and some of these papers that I have within this talk are kind of the biggest currently in terms of what we should be looking for. So we're not going to get in the weeds of this too much, but I do want to highlight 3 studies that help dictate what decisions we make with our off-season programming. So this is a large, what we call a systematic review. It's essentially when you take a whole bunch of different studies, you boil those down to the most important and impactful ones, and then take results from that to drive clinical decision-making, or in the performance world, the decisions that you make within the weight room. So in this specific study here, they took 26,000 different athletes that had about 3,500 different injuries. And what they looked at when they kind of separated different variables from what these people did in their off-season programming or even in their injury prevention programming, they found that just standard strength training reduced sports injuries to less than 1/3, which is extremely impactful. So there's probably something that when we maximize performance, we're probably minimizing injury for the most part too. When you dive into this further, overuse injuries can be decreased by at least 50%, again, with adequate strength training. Now, interestingly enough, and this will rub a lot of people the wrong way, they found no benefit with additional stretching either before or after exercise. That's interesting. Now, it's definitely one of the 5 components of physical fitness. Flexibility is important, but probably not as much as we think in terms of injury prevention. When we dive in further, this article specifically looked at ACL prevention programs. They had about 2,200 different studies that they screened, and they took 8 of the best ones, again, to kind of look at what those studies found. Most of these programs met what we call like best practice recommendations, meaning they included things like plyometrics, strength, agility, and landing mechanics. Okay, but the actual content that was within these were really variable, which is interesting. So what someone might be doing on the West Coast might be completely different from someone on the East Coast. That being said, regardless of this difference in variability between these different programs, they found that there was a significant reduction in ACL injury by at least half, 53%. And then finally, the last paper we'll touch on, this is the National Athletic Trainers Association position statement. This is a wonderful paper that, again, highlights some of the things that these last 2 papers talked about. So they found that you could reduce up to 75% of injuries in these high-risk athletes, which we talk about typically are females in basketball and soccer, again, and in relation to ACL injury. But they found that even performing a preventative training program 2 to 3 times a week for 15 to 20 minutes can substantially reduce these injury rates. Okay. They finished this statement paper by saying, when you design these programs, as long as you contain at least 3 of the following criteria or umbrella terms or categories of strength training, that's how you have the most impact. So picking between these 5 different things, you're going to pick 3, either strength, plyometrics, agility, flexibility, and balance. So these papers are really interesting because they show that we can have a lot of influence over the decisions we make, and we don't have to be so nitty-gritty with our programming. So basically, the investment and energy in creating team-specific injury reduction programs by these standards are super realistic for implementation. This is a guy, he's kind of one of the emerging leaders in the sports physical therapy world. His name is Eric Mira. He has a wonderful podcast, and in this episode specifically, he had 2 really good quotes that I just wanted to share that I think relate really well to what Slocum and I are kind of talking about today. So his first quote I just want to share. So, supplementing the sport with non-sport training is the thing, more than any particular type of training. So in this podcast, if you do listen, but if you don't, I'll highlight what he says. He takes the example of having a cross-country athlete. So in most cases, a lot of people would take that cross-country athlete, put them in the weight room, and do low-load, high-volume training. But in reality, that athlete probably gets a whole ton of that with the nature of their sport. Supplementing that, probably with high-load, low-volume training, is very important to kind of supplement what that athlete might need. Okay, second quote I wanted to highlight. So there is huge value to an individual athlete pushing themselves close to their max limit in a controlled environment so that they feel they have access to their capacity. Again, that's kind of the role of what we should be doing in the off season. And even in the event that they don't actually increase peak power output, they've increased their experience and exposure in doing so. And a lot of times we see these different injuries that occur in season when athletes aren't able to pull from their full capacity in these different sporting situations that are so variable and so different in the way that they present. So, big takeaway from this part of my PowerPoint, there is freedom in design. As the sports medicine staff or the strength and conditioning staff or the coaching staff, there is no magic recipe for some of these athletes in their prevention training programs. But being intentful using some of the recommendations we just highlighted is probably the most important thing. So there is freedom in design. And I think for us, that's very freeing in trying to make the decision on what's best. So when we talk about different programs, there are different things available that are kind of off the shelf, if you will. We have the FIFA 11 Plus, the FIFA 11 Plus for kids, and then a big ACL prevention program called Sports Metrics. You can also take these off the shelf, if you will, and implement them with your programming for your athletes, or you can make up something that you think fits the demands of your team a little bit more closely. So Slocum and I kind of took the FIFA 11 Plus and we changed a few things for our Dynamo Dash youth teams. We kind of took out some different things and plugged in different things that we thought would meet the needs of this population a little bit more. So again, individualizing it to your team based on what you believe the demands to be. As long as you're following those guidelines we just highlighted, you're going to make a difference in terms of injury reduction across the team as a whole. So one of the other big things that Slocum talked about was load capacity or work capacity. And this is kind of the second half of my part of this presentation here today. So back in 2005, we're just going to talk a little bit about this research article. A guy named Dr. Dye kind of coined this term that we call the envelope of function. So here you have your graph, okay, on the y-axis, you have your load, right? On the bottom, you have your frequency. And this thick black line here, we call that your envelope of function. Okay, generally, like if you work out and your load stays below this, you're in an area where there's going to be homeostasis, or you're going to kind of stay the same. You're not going to change very much. You're probably not going to get any worse, but you're probably not going to get any better. When we go above that, we're calling on the demands of the athlete a little bit higher than their envelope of function. And when you go very, very high, that's when you typically have injuries. So I just wanted to highlight this quick. So this is an example of what happens with an athlete when they get hurt. So you have your black line here, the envelope of function. We consider this like their pre-injury status, maybe in the preseason or when the season starts. But this athlete in specific gets hurt. They tear their ACL. Very quickly, their envelope of function, or that black line, falls sharply. Before, what could be done underneath that curve, whether that was a barbell squat or sprints on the field, now they're only able to tolerate things like basic rehab exercises that we do in PT. 9 months later, as they rehab with people like myself or with Slocum, we see this envelope of function start to increase back up to the point they're ready to return to play, and that has raised higher. Again, envelope of function, work capacity, load capacity, all these kind of things mean the same thing. So I have a great friend. She's a physical therapist named Sierra Berge. She works at Duke University, where I used to work. She loves to use a metaphor of a laundry basket and dirty laundry. So I just like this example. I think this is really good. So we have athlete A and athlete B. So athlete A, in his off-season, he has a productive off-season. He's at ATH working out, doing off-season conditioning, off-season strength conditioning, where athlete B sits at home and plays Xbox. Over the course of their off-season, athlete A grows their hamper. Athlete B loses a little bit of size in their hamper. When you have the demands of sport or exercise or athletic, really anything, that's your laundry. Athlete A, when you have that amount of laundry put in, might have a laundry basket that's 10% full. Athlete B, who did nothing, the same amount of laundry, makes theirs 35% full. Okay. Again, athlete A, bigger laundry basket. Athlete B, smaller laundry basket. When the demands of sport occur or in-season competition occurs, and there's a lot of laundry thrown on these athletes and their hampers, okay, athlete A has their risk fairly well managed, where athlete B is more prone to kind of have laundry overflowing over the edges and be at a greater risk for injury. And I think this is a wonderful metaphor with some of the things that Slocum and I are trying to highlight today. When you look at the literature a little bit more and you look in the science of what is load and how we manage that, there's an interesting concept that we call acute on chronic ratio. People will measure this in elite level sports with different GPS technology, and we're going to kind of track, or we're going to discuss how we can do that when we don't have access to fancy equipment. So again, this is a ratio. On top, you have your acute. This may be as short as one training session, but is often commonly 1 week of training. And on the bottom, this can represent like 28 days of training, basically a month or 3 to 6 weeks. Another way to look at this is like a fatigue fitness model. Your fatigue, or on the top, is the load of your laundry, and then on the bottom is your fitness, or the size of your laundry basket. We're going to talk about this a little bit more, but when you put numbers in here and you play around with it, we found that there is kind of this preventative effect in terms of reducing injury rates when you have a number that comes like 0.8 to 1.3. And that's fairly ambiguous, but I promise we're going to get around to what that means. So here is, for example, a runner. Let's say their acute workload over the last 70 days has been 30 miles. Over the last 28 days, they've had 4 different runs. And when we take that and we put that in their chronic workload, and we divide that, they have acute on chronic ratio of 1.05. This is a fairly famous graph that a lot of us in rehab sciences like to look at and use when we kind of describe this different stuff to athletes and to families. So if you look here in the green, that's kind of your sweet spot. If your acute chronic workload ratio is within that, that's a good thing. When you get into this red and you have high workloads, but your chronic workload over the last month has been low, aka your off season, that's when you have a risk of injury. If you plot on this black line, that's kind of your risk of injury over time, and you can see with this yellow number, the 1.05, this athlete falls well within that. So even in principle, it's just an interesting concept to think of in terms of why these athletes should be being productive over the off season, even if you're not tracking this specifically. So the question is, how does this change what I do? So that's great, but who cares? So there are 2 different ways to monitor this. You have external load monitoring and internal load monitoring. When you look at the research, again, a lot of people at the highest level, like collegiate and professional level sports, they have access to things like GPS tracking. The Catapult system is one of the biggest things that's on the market currently. This looks at things like distance, speed, and can look at risk-associated tendencies done in sport by accelerometry and by GPS measuring. You can also do things like baseball pitches or cricket bowling if you're in Australia, which is where the majority of this load research comes out of. For us, kind of at the high school or even the collegiate level, internal load monitoring can be recorded through what we call like your RPE, or your rating of perceived exertion. So this is just to highlight external load monitoring. Basically what you'll do is these athletes have these kind of almost like a sports vest they put on, and you put this small accelerometer or GPS tracking in the back. And then what happens is the sports medicine staff and performance staff gets really complicated graphs here to kind of look at workloads over the course of the season. So this green line here, this represents chronic workload, and these blue lines here represent acute workloads. It's very interesting kind of the decisions that you can make based off this. Okay. Kind of in the more practical world, when you don't have access to all that, a really interesting technology that has come out in the last, I imagine the last 5 or 6 or 7 years when Whoop came out. Whoop is a fitness band that attempts to bring load management technology to the general public. And this is wonderful for some of our athletes. This is an example of my load monitoring. I have one myself, but it's a very practical way to see if you're getting enough rest and to see if your load is going either above or below kind of the capacity for what you have right then. So real briefly, and again, this is just one example, these blue lines are kind of my personal workload or strain, where yellow is my rest, and then they will use different metrics and formulas within the Whoop system to kind of give you recommendations on what you should be doing. Internal load monitoring, and we're almost done, but basically what happens is an athlete will complete a training session. That athlete at the end will rate their perceived exertion of that session on a scale of 0 to 10. And then you multiply that session by the amount of minutes to get your training load. So let's say a kid finishes soccer practice, he rates it a 7 out of 10 in terms of difficulty. Multiply that by an hour and a half, and you get this arbitrary unit of load that you can record and create chronic workloads over the last 3 to 6 weeks to look at that acute on chronic ratio to kind of play around with these numbers and see if you're managing load well. So this isn't perfect. We're still learning how this works. This is an interesting quote from James Harden. I think this came out in the last year, but he said, even if I'm a little banged up, I try to push through to a certain extent. Have you ever seen me not play because of load management? So it's kind of funny. These are the things that we're still struggling with in terms of like how our athletes perceive it, how the public perceives it. But it's very interesting as this data and this research comes out, how we can use this to minimize or reduce injury risk. So in summary, okay, injury reduction programs work, but we probably don't need to stress over the content. Know that prepackaged programs are effective, but also individualized programs are very effective as well. Maintain an appropriate chronic workload in the off-season. So athletes who fail to maximize their off-season will see heavy spikes in load with the start of preseason practices or even with the start of in-season competition. Sometimes the different things that we just talked about in this presentation are a bit arbitrary when you don't have a total big grasp on it. But there's power in awareness, and there's power of at least understanding these concepts that their workload in the off-season should be kept to an appropriate amount so they have the capacity in season to draw from that. And finally, do something. Utilize the personnel and the skill set of the staff around you, whether that's athletic trainers, PTs, performance staff, coaching staff. If you don't have access to that, you can use some of our resources here at Sports Park, our strength and conditioning team, physical therapy, your orthopedist. All these people are on your side to help you make these decisions and maximize the potential for your off-season to be great. So in closing, this is a pre-recorded lecture, but I imagine we have time for any questions if you haven't typed those out already. If we didn't get to answer your question, here is our contact information. Again, feel free to reach out to Slocum or myself at any time, and we're happy to help however we can. Thanks for coming today, and we look forward to seeing you next week.